All right. Before I go in the coffee shop to like work on editing this video, so I have the writer deck here. It does fit in the backpack, but it's not like I'm gonna bring this everywhere. So this is it. This is like version 4 of this thing, and you can see it's really just like 2 pieces. So this is based on like Scott Eugen's standby dock, and then this is a Keychron K3 keyboard case, and then merge them together. I needed this to be lifted up, and I sliced off the back, the AirPod charger, and then added feet here to keep the USB-C open. You can see one nice thing is I can write directly into Obsidian since I'm just using my phone. And then one small thing I did with CSS was it can detect when it's going into portrait and landscape and then change the font based on that. Because when I'm using it with my hands in portrait, I want to have like smaller text. But when I'm using it in here, I want like slightly bigger text, and then I just changed it to Georgia just for now. Anyway, next up is just me talking about the build with some book notes about like getting started, learning how to use a 3D printer. So it's gonna have like some video of different prints and different versions of this. Creativity is just connecting things. When you ask creative people how they did something, they feel a little guilty because they didn't really do it. They just saw something. That's something Steve Jobs said, and I've seen it in a few different books. I made this focused writing tool, and I'm feeling that guilt. I just meshed together 2 things. One of them is this keyboard case, and then there's this iPhone dock that Scott Eugen made, and the model's available, so I took that and then chopped off the back of it and raised it up for this. The level of creativity of combining things goes up when you're combining either unexpected things or combining more primitive things. So like the base ingredients of something. Instead, I've combined expected things. A keyboard and phone stand are often things that go together. I'm using pre-existing models, so these aren't really primitive things that I'm combining together. And I even used off-the-shelf devices, an iPhone and a Keychron K3 keyboard. I did very little like original creating here, and that's where the guilt stems from. Still, I pictured something in my head and brought it into the world, so I have some satisfaction in that. It's bringing me joy because I finally have this focused writing tool where I can write directly into Obsidian. And I say like focused in quotes because it is still using my phone, so I need to resist the urge to grab the phone and use it for social media. There's a little bit of friction that this adds to like make it a little less distracting. Landscape makes it less tempting to switch to social media every few seconds. Also, iOS doesn't have a command tab app switcher, so that also reduces the temptation. After this, I do have a few spare phones. I always think I'm going to sell my old phone, but then it just ends up sitting around in a drawer. I might dedicate it as a permanent home in this thing with fewer distractions. And I need to build the skills before I can start to get creative. Here's a quote from Twyla Tharp in The Creative Habit. What all these people have in common is that they have mastered the underlying skills of their creative domain and built their creativity on the solid foundation of those skills. Further on, she writes, "You're only kidding yourself if you put creativity before craft. Craft is where our best efforts begin. You should never worry that rote exercises aimed at developing skills will suffocate creativity." This is the first time I've used a 3D printer, so before even getting creative with it, I need to learn how to use it and also to learn 3D modeling for things that are going to be printed. The very first thing I printed was a 1-cup measure. I'm visiting my parents for a month, and one thing that we forgot to bring is a 1-cup measure for Booster's dog food. I printed that out, and that was just a pre-made model through the app. And that allowed me to just go through the process of printing something to see if like, did I set it up right? Is it going to work at all? Is this filament loaded? And even though it should be simple and basic, that was still an opportunity to feel stupid. As Stephen Kotler writes, "At first, learning makes us feel stupid. New concepts and new terminology can often add up to new frustrations. But don't judge yourself for the stupidity you feel along the way." That's in the book, The Art of Impossible. And with 3D printing, one of the things you learn is never let go of the end of the spool, like the filament spool. I learned that afterwards because I immediately let go of the end of the spool. It was taped to the side. I think this is how most spools come. It was taped to the side. I took the tape off, and then it immediately got buried within the spool, and I had to go dig that out. And what that meant is for the entire first week through like the course of this first spool, I would have to go to the garage, untangle it, and then hit retry a few times. And this amounted to about like 80 times because all the notifications are still there and it's still in the app. I can look at how many times this happened. It's not an issue with the printer or the filament. It's just I have a second spool that I loaded correctly and have not had a single tangle. So yeah, I felt stupid, but that's the cost of learning something new. Then yeah, one of the reasons I made this is I've had a long interest in these different tools for focus and like writing, like focus when writing. I own a FreeWrite Traveler and thought it'd be good to recreate something like it as a project to learn from, because I didn't bring the FreeWrite Traveler with me on this trip. So I was thinking, oh, maybe I can just like make a worse version of it. But pretty quickly I realized that because it has a hinge, maybe that would be a little too complicated for one of my first 3D printing projects. So I thought I'd just start with like a kind of this solid version of it. I've made a bunch of digital things, but not anything really physical. But I think some of the approach to learning a new tool, like digital or analog, whatever it is, it still applies here. So one is to go through some structured learning. So if that's like a digital thing, if it's code, going through like coding tutorials, video editing, or like I was learning Blender last year, so just going through those tutorials. But number two, having a personal project to apply things to, so that you can take kind of those, the structured lessons and structured concepts, and then apply it to something abstract in the personal project. And a personal project also will give you an infinite amount of problems to solve. Then you solve your own problems. And this kind of goes back to that craft and creativity framing, where tutorials will allow me to learn the craft, the basic skills of using a new tool. In this case, it's 3D printing and then 3D modeling for things that will be printed. Then the personal project allows me to see how those skills are applied. And then that steers toward creativity. And it's this thing of the more that you master the fundamental skills, the more creative you can be, because you don't have to like look up a tutorial to make things. And bringing it back to the FreeWrite, one of the founders is Adam Lieb, and I listened to a bunch of interviews with him just to hear about like the creation of the FreeWrite and sort of that origin story, and then just his background. And he mentions that with the FreeWrite, he was trying to combine a few things that he enjoyed at the time. This was about, I think it was 2014, maybe earlier than that, but around that time. So number one was the Kindle, inspiring the use of the e-ink screen, and then mechanical keyboards. And number three was focused writing software that was getting popular around that time. And I used to use as I mentioned, I've been interested in like this focused writing sort of niche for a while. And I remember I looked up what it was called, because I was thinking it wasn't IA, right? So it was called Write Room. And it was this Mac app that allowed you to look at one sentence at a time in the middle, or like one line at a time in the middle of the screen. Then there were different settings, but that was the main thing. I think the default setting was one line at a time, and you could write. And Adam Lee talks about this other focused writing software that didn't have a backspace. And he thought, no, that's pretty curious. Like what if we created like a dedicated hardware device to have this focused writing experience? And I think it did have backspace, but it didn't have arrow keys, the first version of the FreeWrite. And yeah, it's great because he has these interviews when the FreeWrite Traveler was coming out in 2020, but he also has blog posts from like 2013, 2014, where he's talking about the prototypes of the FreeWrite and just the build process there. And it'd be really interesting. He mentions that he has like pretty detailed build logs, or like a build journal coming up with everything. So yeah, that'd be like cool to see. Anyway, yeah, my thing is much less creative. I'm combining less fundamental things. Of course, like they, I think, designed their own keyboard and they were using an e-ink screen, where I pretty much just have this plastic housing for ready-made things, my iPhone and a keyboard. So yeah, it's definitely on the lower end of the creative scale, but again, more for me to build just those foundational skills. And still, it's pretty satisfying to use. I've used like this prototype for probably about like an hour of writing now, and then I could actually see myself using it to write a lot as I like develop these different prototypes. And this all reminded me of Virgil Abloh, the designer, and he has this thing called the 3% approach. It's in this talk he did for, I think it's the Harvard Design School. And here's the quote: "Things are intriguing to me when they're slightly edited, like these shoes. I was only interested in restraining myself and only editing it 3%. That's the end of the quote. And someday I hope to need to restrain myself to 3%. At my current skill level, I need to stretch myself to reach like 3% creativity. But the idea is that you can be creative by taking something that exists and editing it by 3%, which is probably about what I did here by like adding feet to it, combining the models. That is like the main thing. And it accomplished a few things for me. So I learned to use the 3D printer. I learned to modify the models, and I learned to combine two models and then make some edits there. I also was doing, the very like first version of this was just like the iPhone stand. And I did try to model it from scratch in Tinkercad. So yeah, it was pretty much like a rectangle, and then I just sliced pieces off of it so that there would be like a lip to hold the phone. And I tried that, and then I tried to just like mount, like I had some mounting tape and put that to the case, the keyboard case, and typed on that for a while. So yeah, this current version is, there are parts of it that are elegant because someone else did it, but the parts I've added are like really just more rectangular blocks, but it's functional. And then I'll add some Gorilla Grip feet to it so that it can stay still on a tabletop. And then of course I need to credit, I think I have mentioned Scott Eugen here for me finally taking the plunge on a 3D printer. He has a bunch of cool videos showing things that he's made, I think over the past few years. I think the story is he used to really be into woodworking and then moved to his Seattle apartment and didn't have the space to do that regularly, but he got into 3D printing and has done really cool prints, really cool designs, and very cool videos about this. So I imagine he's inspired probably thousands of people at this point. Started with 3D printing. I don't have the urge to print figures or things like that. It was really seeing these videos where he's making small upgrades to his apartment, to his desk and like workspace, that got me to want to buy a printer. Similar to Adam Lieb, I listened to a few interviews with him, and he doesn't have like a ton of podcast interviews. I think I was able to find maybe 2 of them where he talks about the story, and like the story of making the videos, and storytelling itself is something that he thinks about a ton, and using like I think it's Dan Harmon story circle for his videos. Anyway, he shares this quote about education from Harold Edgerton. The quote is, "The trick to education is to teach in such a way whereby the time someone realizes they're learning, it's too late." That's another quote. And yeah, for his videos, he wants to tell the story of something he's building. He doesn't want to do straight tutorial videos of how to use the Bambu Labs, blah, blah, blah. He just wants to show cool things he's made with it, and you'll be able to learn some things through osmosis there. And then if you want to have the detailed step-by-step things, there are other channels to go for that. Yeah, that inspired me to make this video, trying to document making this focused writing device. And of course, I'm also using his model for the standby phone dock. And there's plenty of learning just by like taking a closer look at the model itself, which is a really cool thing about 3D printing and all the models that people are making and sharing, is that you can look very closely and think about the decisions that people made there without having to like print out the physical one to examine it or anything. So for the first few prototypes, as mentioned, yeah, I did try to model from scratch, and that gave me the basic skills to then modify existing models. And each version can be seen as a failure, but of course it can just be reframed as an iteration and another step towards success. Someone else I've been listening to interviews of is during this past week, or not interviews, he has a lot of AMA videos, is Adam Savage. And he also has one of my favorite books on creativity. He's of course like one of the co-creators of Mythbusters, and has a great YouTube channel showing different projects. But yeah, the book is Every Tool's a Hammer, and he talks about failing in this passage. He writes, "When we say we need to teach kids how to fail, we aren't really telling the full truth. What we mean when we say that is simply that creation is iteration, and that we need to give ourselves the room to try things that might not work in the pursuit of something that will. Wrong turns are part of every journey." That's the end of the quote. I had a bunch of failures here. Clearly one of them, I'm self-conscious about this failing to even be creative in the first place, because it's a simple mashing together of 2 different models. Even still, there's these failed prototypes along the way. And I failed trying to add a built-in wrist pad, and that's just a rectangle that I needed to print, and just sizing it. It took a couple tries to get it sized right. Then I mounted it. And then there was a big failure here, which I won't harp on too much, but I'm using the iPhone because of a mistake. I wanted to also use an e-ink screen. I had this Books Palma that I bought, I think, last year, a couple years ago, that I wasn't using, and I was going to use that for this. And I had a dirty, like a messy workspace, was trying to clean it up and was trying to show this, like one of the prototypes. But of course the phone wasn't actually attached to the back and it fell. I broke it. I have it on video and yeah, not fun. So that was like an actual failure, but something to learn from. The main thing, be more careful when I'm doing a demo of a phone that's not attached actually to the stand. Anyway, the last quote here is from Daniel Hansen, DHH, Ruby on Rails fame, and just general internet fame, I guess. But yeah, have liked his writing in his books. And here's the quote: "You can build on top of a lot of things that exist in this world. Somebody goes in and does that hard ground level science-based work, and then on top of that, you build the art." That's the end of the quote. So yeah, that's getting back to it, that these people with a ton of skill are able to build this foundation that other people are able to build on. And now I have this foundation to create this focused writing device. It's a canvas to start being creative as I try to build the skills. And as I'm printing these things out and doing some like small modifications, and especially as I'm actually using the device for writing, ideas are starting to come to mind. So for example, there's a lot of space to the left and right of the phone. Maybe I can do something with that space. Maybe I can put a Pomodoro timer there. Also, when I showed my wife, she immediately asked, like, why is the phone in landscape and not in portrait? So maybe I can try a version of that. Maybe there's a slot for a second phone, since I'm using devices I already have. And as mentioned, maybe I could have like one phone that's dedicated in there, but I can also have a slot for my current phone, because I noticed when I'm writing, I'm often looking things up in Kindle or Readwise to grab a quote, and maybe I could just always have my other phone available to do that. Then, yeah, just other things, like as I showed in the demo, because I'm using Obsidian, maybe there are customizations I can make through that, just based on it switching to like landscape. And as mentioned, I'm printing a version right now that will allow me to use it without removing my phone case, because I do use a case, except I wasn't using it on the Books Palma. That's why the screen broke. So that's that. It may not be like the most creative start, but I have a canvas to work with now to build up my skills so I can be more creative in this medium in the future. And hopefully I'll make that progress and share those future builds in the future. I said future twice. Thanks for checking this out.